Hello, Simon Rainier, Lynx Armitsari out of Campbell River, British Columbia, and it's been a hot sec. Long time no see. So let's talk about something kind of fun, kind of interesting. An argument that keeps coming up, which is slightly misguided, I would say. Follow me through. See if you've heard this before. I prefer a shorter sword because then I can get in close and do horrible, nasty things. These are my side swords. You'll notice one is quite significantly longer than the other. Not necessarily the first thing you'll notice. First thing you notice, this one's plastic, nylon. This one's steel. But it's the size difference I want to talk about, because size does matter. Bigger is better, to a point. When we talk about sort of fighting, engagement, sword fights specifically, there's a concept I like to refer to as the donut of death. Picture a donut. One of those nice, like, proper traditional donuts with a hole in it, circle shape, not those, like, cream-filled ones that are, like, my favorite, and now I really want a donut. Yeah. Anyway, someone wants to, like, go for donuts sometime. That'd be cool. Anyway, basically, the donut of death is this principle of there is sort of the outer circle, which is the maximum I can reach with the end of my sword. With a longer sword, it's further away from me. And then there's an inner circle as well. And theoretically, anything inside the inner circle, which is where you stand, you are unable to threaten your opponent with a sword. You have that sort of like doughy part where you're under constant danger, or your opponent is under constant danger from your sword, because you can pull back within that. Theoretically, there's an area inside that where you are safe. I would argue, however, that just means you need different techniques within that donut hole. It's the Timbit of death. That's when we start focusing on, put that down for a moment, things like grappling. Maybe I have a dagger. There is no inside of the circle with the dagger. You are always threatened by the dagger as long as you are within that outer circle. So the theory of this argument of shorter swords are what I prefer, shorter swords are better, is that you can close into that distance and you are safe while the other person is in danger. Problem with that, as we've already kind of alluded to, is there's not really that safe area properly. Even with a much longer sword, I can pull that back quite far. You have to be basically like chest to chest with me before my sword is no longer an effective thing for the blade, and then I just flip it around and bop you in the face with the pommel. Or, you know, crossguard punch. So, that's problem number one. Problem number two is we now have to fight. Say your sword is 6 inches shorter than mine. You now have to face that extra danger for 6 extra inches, which doesn't sound like a lot, but trust me, when you're in a sword fight, every inch matters. Don't take that out of context. So that is actually quite a significant distance with which to fight your way through before I even really have to worry about you. And as you step in, and I step back, that magnifies that distance by many times. You have to move so much faster forward than I have to move backwards. There's a whole nother topic about moving forwards and backwards in a sword fight and what you should do and what you should not do. Another time, perhaps. So, with that, to kind of further back up my point of, I would almost universally prefer a longer sword, to an extent. There does come a point when a sword becomes unwieldable. I always fall back on George Silver, and I should be able to comfortably move my sword behind my thumb. And that is the ideal length of sword, I find. Different fencing masters throughout the ages had different ideas on it. This, for me, is universally good. Anyway, longer sword, almost universally better. Anecdotally, how this works out for me personally is I have fought people side sorting with both of these swords against synthetic versus synthetic, steel versus steel. Steel swords will eat synthetic swords. Don't mix the two. The people who I were fighting against, same person in a lot of cases, had a synthetic and a steel sword which were approximately the same length. So the only real variable is my sword's length is changing. Universally, I did much better when I had the longer weapon. Now, feel free to turn that around and say, "Oh, you just suck at fighting in close." No, I don't. But even if I'm wrong, and I do, the level of training required to fight your way into distance is so much higher than it is to keep the person at distance. So, yeah, maybe I suck at it, but probably so do you. With that in mind, another kind of anecdote. This is more evidence, not anecdote personally. Within the SCA, there is something called cut and thrust, and I, having had fairly minimal participation in the SCA, I've never actually had a chance to try it. I really want to. It looks really cool, and where they really shine is you can basically bring whatever sword you want as long as it fits within their safety requirements, and you have the proper gear for it. And this is really cool because you can get side swords versus rapiers versus long swords versus katanas versus shamshirs versus what else have I seen? Viking swords, arming swords. There's people who try to do I-33 against bolognese. There's people who and it's a really cool idea. But watch their tournaments, and specifically watch for the finals. Every single final matchup I have ever seen in an SCA tournament is between two rapiers. The longest weapon with the longest reach. Because again, rapier, like, you're lunging way out. You have massive reach with a rapier. And this clearly shows, I feel, that the longer weapon, the longer reach, has the advantage in a sword fight. If I can hit you and you can't hit me, I'm going to win. If you have to close that distance while constantly under threat from my weapon, I'm probably going to win. Not universally. There are some techniques for doing this. At various HEME events, you'll come across workshops saying how, like, basically teaching shorter fighters how to beat taller fighters. Super cool. And it's universally because shorter reach needs extra training, needs extra techniques to win the day. If you have the reach, you will probably take the fight. It's sort of an addendum to the idea of the bigger, stronger person almost always wins the fight. The taller sword fighter almost always wins, given equivalent training. Bugs the crap out of me, by the way, as an aside, when people say size doesn't really matter in a sword fight. I'm tall, and it doesn't give me an advantage. Yes, it does. You've never fought anyone taller than you. You're 6'8". Yeah. So, short people exist. I'm sort of a happy average, 5'10" and a bit. So I fought tall people. I fought short people. Short people are easier to fight. Shorter reach weapons, easier to deal with, because you have many more options. With that in mind, quick little historical note, why then did shorter weapons exist historically? Bringing out my other side sword again, both of these are within sort of historical ranges for side swords that would have been around the same time in history. Why did they bother making these? Well, simply because the primary purpose of a sword is not necessarily to sword fight, it's to look cool and feel like a badass. And that's really the primary purpose of carrying a weapon with you even into modern times. People who carry weapons aren't doing it because they think they're going to get in a fight or think they're going to need to defend themselves on the street. They're doing it because they feel cool, they feel like a hero while they carry weapons. With that in mind, if I were in a situation where I were carrying a sword with me on a daily basis, semi-legal where I live, as long as I'm not actually using it as a weapon, it's perfectly fine. I would almost universally go with the shorter option, a sword of this approximate size, on the grounds that if I walk up and down stairs, this isn't like clocking on the stairs as I go down. Something like this will. If I happen to need to, you know, turn around quickly, there's only so much distance that's going behind me, as opposed to something like this, goes a lot further. Smaller swords are a heck of a lot more convenient to carry. And if I'm just wearing one to feel cool, I'm probably going to take a smaller sword. If I was on my way to a duel, I'm going to take the longest sword they'll let me get away with. If I'm honestly, if I'm on my way to a duel, I'm taking my rapier. Single best weapon for one-on-one fight, in terms of swords especially. Rapiers are best in duels. And again, that's why they win the tournaments. Yeah, so if you like a shorter weapon, I'm not trying to take that away from you. What I'm trying to do is just encourage people to be realistic about it. And I used to think this way too. Like I had a shorter rapier than a lot of my peers, and I liked, because I was, you know, developed a few tricks and techniques for getting in close. And that's cool if you're training that way. So, if you like a shorter weapon, cool, good on you. Train extra to learn how to close, awesome, do it. Just don't pretend it's actually an advantage. Your training is the strength, not the weapon. Cheers.